we're just so lucky to have you here with us in this very unusual year. I know travel has not been easy, but thank you just for making it out here and being with us to present your film.
そんな風に言っていただけてとても嬉しいです。僕もここに来られてこうやって先ほど皆さんの拍手を受けて、皆さんが本当に楽しんでいただいたことが僕自身にも伝わってきてとても嬉しく思っています。
I'm so happy that you say all of that to me. I'm so happy that I am able to be here and to have received your applause earlier. Really, I felt that you had enjoyed it, so thank you so much.
So before we start talking about the film, I really want to know a little bit about your formative influences, because you're obviously fairly young, and these films, Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, Drive My Car, all your recent films really feel like the works of a master. So I'm really curious, which artists have really defined cinema for you?
難しい質問で、いつもそういう質問されると困るんですけど、でもこの「偶然と想像」っていう映画に関してはもうかなりはっきりしていて、これはもうフランスのエリック・ロメールという監督ですね。
It's always a difficult question to answer, and I get asked this quite often, but regarding Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, the answer is actually quite apparent, which is that it's the French director Eric Romer, sorry, Eric.
この映画を作るにあたって、前作の「寝ても覚めても」という映画が、フランスで公開された時に僕もパリにいて、でそのエリック・ロメールの編集をされたマリー・ステファンさんという方のお話を聞く機会があって、でそのロメール自身にとってその短編制作っていうのはどれだけ重要な意味を持っていたかっていうことを聞きました。長編の間のリズムを作っていく、そのトライアンドエラーをしやすいすごく作者のその制作のリズムを整えていくいい形だというふうに伺って、自分自身もまさにそういうふうに作っていきたいと思って、実際これは7話のシリーズとして企画しています。でそれもロメールの真似なんですけど、これはその最初の3話ということですね。
This all sort of goes back to initially when I had my film Asako I II play in France, I was able to meet Mary Stevens, who was the editor of Romer. There I talked to her about short films, and I learned how for Romer it was very important to be making shorts because it was a great way to be able to reorganize your rhythm towards making a feature. You're able to do some trial and error. And it really made me think I wanted to do something like that. I have thought of this as also a 7-part series, just like the way Romer had done something similar. And so that was one of my influences for sure.
Well, you kind of preempted my next question. I was going to ask you about a turn to making these short stories and this omnibus of short stories after making some films that are very epic in scope. And the Romer connection makes sense, but I'm curious, how did making this film change your relationship to narrative time?
自分にとってはすごくなんていうのかな、この映画を作ること自体が新しい経験でした。偶然っていうものがテーマになっているんですけれども、そのことによって、今まで自分が作ることができなかったようなその物語ナラティブができたような気がしています。でこの偶然っていうものが出てくると、ちょっと時間が枝分かれするような感覚っていうものがありました。それはあれが起こったら、もしくは起こらなかったらっていうような想像ができる。でその二重の時間みたいなものが現れるっていうことがある気がしています。
So making this film was actually quite a new experience for me in terms of storytelling. The theme is coincidence. And so when I'm working with coincidence, I realized that I was able to work with narratives in a different way because something about working with coincidence allows time to fork. And you're able to imagine things that could have happened or things that didn't happen. And that can be really interesting for the imagination.
I think in all your films, but especially Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, so coincidence is obviously one major theme, and the other theme is romance or romantic desire. And the two kind of inject magic or something less assuring into everyday life in these films. So why are these two your preoccupations, coincidence and romance?
自分ただねそんなに正直言って考えて作っているわけではないっていうところがあって、大体自分の書き方っていうのは本当に人物を喋らせていく、会話をさせていくと、自分もこのキャラクターはこういうことを考えているんだっていうことが分かってくる。でその時にそのおっしゃったようなこのキャラクターはこういうことを欲しているんだっていうことが分かってくる。で一方でその欲していることが表現できない言えないんだっていうこともなんか分かってくるような感覚が書いていてあります。
So to be quite honest, I'm not thinking too hard about these things when I'm writing. But that all said, when I write, the way that I write is to make the characters talk to each other, and that's how I learn what they're thinking and the things that they're desiring. And when I'm doing that, I also learn about their desires, but also what they can't say about their desires.
であまりにこういうことを聞かれるのでなんというか、考えてないとだけも言ってられないので自分でそれなりに考えるとでも2つ、偶然の種類があるような気がしてます。である欲望があるっていうことは何か企てている何か欲しいものがある。でその時には嘘をついたり企んだりすることがあるわけですよね。でただ人間って本当に愚かなものでもあるのでその企みっていうのは簡単に壊れてしまう。でその壊れてしまう原因が偶然っていうことがとても多いような気がしています。欲望が偶然によってくじけてしまうということがあると。
So I often get asked about this, and so I can't always keep saying that I'm not really thinking so much. So this is me trying to think about it. And when I do, I think that there are maybe two types of coincidences. One being related to desire of human beings. I think when you desire something, you plan to get something, you want something, and you conspire and you plan. But at the end of the day, humans are sort of poor creatures in a way, and so plans can break. And when they do, they're often related to coincidences.
でこうやって何かを欲望してそれが偶然によって失敗してしまうっていうことがある一方で、何かそんなになんていうか欲望はあるんだけれどもなんというのかなそれを悪用しない態度で望んでいった時にその偶然っていうものがその人を本当に望んでいるところに連れて行ってくれるような時っていうのもあると思います。それは例えば第3話のアヤっていう女性の方に起きていることかもしれない。彼女はこの偶然を利用して自分の本当の欲望に気づいていく。自分の繰り返しの日常から何か出ていこうとしているような気もします。
And so when people want things and yet they fail at getting that through coincidences, there's desire. But at the same time, I think if you don't plan to use that in a bad way with bad intentions, coincidences can also take you into unexpected places and give you surprises. I think this is also happening to the character Aya in story number 3, where her desire then leads her to places beyond her daily life.
Well, thank you for thinking during the Q&A. It's helpful.
Thank you.
So you said that you write to get the characters talking. What really strikes me about this film is that all the characters are acting in some way. I mean, they're pretending to be other people. They're lying. They have performance as a part of their life. And I'm curious how you approach performance both as a team but also while you're working with actors.
はい、ありがとうございます。この演技っていうのはでも自分も本当にどうやって扱ったらいいのかっていうことがいまだにわからない。ただ昔よりはちょっと演技っていうものと付き合うこと特に役者っていうものと付き合うことが楽しくなり始めてもいます。
Thank you for saying that. I think at the end of the day, I'm still figuring out a lot of things about how I work with actors and how I work with performance in itself. But now that I've been working for quite some time, I think I am starting to learn and to also enjoy the work.
で、それは自分の演技の捉え方っていうのがだんだん変わってきたからなんだと思います。で、それは演技っていうのは嘘をつくっていうこととはちょっと違うっていうことですね。で、役者さんには大体演じる理由があって、でそれは嘘をつきたいから演じているわけじゃなくて、自分自身を表現したいから演じているんだと思います。演じるっていうのは仮面をつけることじゃなくて、その逆で自分自身をあらわにするための方法なんじゃないかという気が最近は特にしています。
And when I think about performance, I think the way I have started to interpret and think about performance has been changing. I think performing is different fundamentally from lying. To perform, if an actor is performing, they're not doing it in order with the hope to lie, but they're trying to express something about themselves. And so I think it's performing isn't about putting a mask on, but it's actually revealing something about themselves.
でこの、演技の考え方っていうのは多分この物語の中で演じる人々にも当てはまってくると思います。彼らは嘘をつきたいわけではなくて、本当の自分自身の欲望みたいなものをどっちかっていうと探しているような気がします。で、役者と自分が仕事をするときはできることは本当に限られていて、彼らが自分自身を表現できるようにできるだけリラックスできるような撮影現場を作るっていうことです。
And so when people are performing, I really think that it's trying to think about what they're. I think it's what I think about performing. I think is also true about the characters in the film themselves. They're also doing the same things. They're not trying to lie. They're actually just trying to figure out their real desires. And in terms of myself as a director, what I can do is quite limited. But I see my job to be to create an environment for the actors to relax as much as possible.
I just have one more question, and then we'll have time for a couple audience questions. So start thinking about some questions. So you mentioned Romer as this influence. I think you're able to bring in that kind of looseness and openness to serendipity that Romer has. But there's also hints of melodrama. There's hints of genre and genre filmmaking. And I think it's kind of like an intellectual melodrama, what you're doing. And I'm curious, particularly in the way you depict women. These are heroines that we often see in melodramas, but you treat their problems with a lot more seriousness and grace. So I'm curious if there are some directors or films from those genres that have also influenced the making of this one.
この映画に限らないですけれど、自分自身が映画を作る上でとても影響を受けたのはダグラス・サークという本当にメロドラマの巨匠ですね。
This isn't really limited to this film in particular, but definitely a filmmaker that I'm influenced by is the master of melodrama, Douglas Sirk.
で、自分の作るものがメロドラマ的になるっていうのは、要するにバカバカしいっていうか、そういうところがあると思います。そんな高尚なことを扱っているわけではないっていうところが自分でもあって、それは自分自身のコンプレックスでもあるんですけど、ただそのダグラス・サークがインタビューの中で言っていたそのメロドラマを作る時の態度っていうものがあって、それは嫌いながら愛するっていうこと。おそらくその題材に対してある種の批判的な目線、知的な批評みたいなものを加えつつも、でもなんていうのかな、そういうそのバカバカしいものの中にやっぱり愛すべきものっていうのはあるんですよね。本当に実現したいものとか、そのさっき言っていた本当の欲望みたいなものっていうものはバカにできない形で存在しているような気がして、そういうものを尊重しなきゃいけないっていうことも思うんです。そういうことができたらいいなっていうことを思っている、その嫌いながら愛するっていう態度を自分も実践できたらいいなっていうことはすごく思っています。
So what I make in a way as I said there is a melodramatic element to it, and which also means that there's sort of a silliness to the subject matter that I'm dealing with. I'm not really dealing with any highbrow subjects necessarily, and for me that's a little bit of a complex on one end, that those are the subjects I deal with. But I also try to remember something about what Douglas Sirk said, which is to both love and hate the subject matter that you're working with, which I think means to also have a sense of critiquing the subject that you're working with, but then also find something to really love about the thing that you're dealing with, even if it's quite silly. And I think the idea of desire in itself, there's something serious to it, even if it's something quite silly. And to be able to use that as a core of your work and to figure that out is very important.
I'm very amused that you think your work is silly. I think it's so profound without being solemn, and that's what makes it so great.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
ありがとうございます。
We can take a couple audience questions. Just we don't have mics for you, so just try to project, and I'll repeat your question. Over there. I'll just repeat the question so people know. So it's about how the character of the first chapter in Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy is similar to Asako from Asako I and II, and also what is she thinking about in the final shot of the first chapter?
まあこれはですね、まあこういうことは言ってしまうとつまらないものっていうところはあるんですが、寝ても覚めてもの朝子に似ているっていうふうにはまああまり考えてはいませんでした。ただまあ自分の描くあの年代の女性像っていうものがそういうふうになりがちなのかもしれません。その社会的な状況にとらわれてなくて、まあこの映画の中では多分一番自分の欲望に、まあ、率直なタイプの登場人物だと思うんですけど、それがやっぱりその年代的なものも含めて寝ても覚めてもの朝子に似てくるのかもしれません。
I don't want to give too much away because then it becomes a little bit uninteresting. But at the same time, what I want to say is I don't necessarily think that the character is very similar to Asako per se. But that all said, I think there are women of similar generations, and they might be reflecting certain things that I think about that generation in particular. And both of the characters, Asako and the character that you speak of in episode 1, are they're both very honest to their desire. But then also, I think it might reflect something about their shared generation.
で、第1話は、まあ、渋谷っていう、まあ、東京のすごく若者が集まる街で大体撮っているんですけれども、まあ、彼女が最後にそのカメラを向けている側っていうのはあれはその渋谷の街が今まあ、今というかちょうどオリンピックの前でまあ、再開発をしているというか作り直している途中なんですよね。渋谷の街があんなにまあ開けて見えるっていうことは実はまあ自分がより若い頃には全然なくて、あそこは一旦立っていたものが全部壊されてしまってすごく開かれている場所なんです。これはもう日本人というかその東京に住んでる人だったら感じられることなんですけれど、まあその風景を見た時になんかまあそれは彼女がまあこれからまあ直面することというかこれから生きていくことと何かつながるような気がしました。それで彼女はそこに向けてカメラを撮っているんだと思います。
So the first story that you see in the film is mainly set in this area called Shibuya in Tokyo, which is an area known to be full of young people. And what you see in that scene where she's pointing the camera, that's a Shibuya. And this film was shot just before the Olympics, which also meant that the land was getting developed. So I, as a young person, when I was hanging out there, did not see Shibuya in that way where the buildings were getting demolished. It felt so much more open as a landscape in a way that I hadn't seen before. Things that were standing were starting to get demolished. And so when I saw that landscape, I thought that perhaps it related to the future or the next steps that this character is headed towards. And perhaps that's why she took a photo.
I'm so sorry. I believe we're out of time, but I just want to say tomorrow at 7 p.m. we're doing a free 1-hour talk with Ryûsuke in the FLC amphitheater, and there'll be plenty of time to talk to him and ask him questions. So please come to that. It'll be moderated by Matias Pinheiro.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.